A king's death is a matter of state, a carefully managed spectacle of grief and transition. The passing of a monarch should be a solemn, natural event, a final chapter written by God. But on a freezing January night in 1936 in a quiet room at Sandringham House, the final chapter of King George V was not written by God. It was written by a man with a syringe. This is the story of a deathbed conspiracy, not to seize a throne, but to control the final moments of the man who wore the crown. It's the story of how a king's life was brought to a deliberate, calculated end for the most shocking of reasons. King George V was the grandfather of the nation, a stern, steadfast figure who had led his country through the Great War and the turmoil that followed. He was a man of gruff tradition and unwavering duty. He was the anchor of the British Empire. But by the winter of 1935, that anchor was slipping. The king was dying. His chronic bronchial problems, worsened by a lifetime of heavy smoking, had finally overwhelmed him. The end was near. The family gathered, the nation held its breath, and the world's press camped outside the gates of his Norfolk estate. At his side was his personal physician, Lord Dawson. He was one of the most respected medical men in the country, the king's doctor, a man entrusted with the health and life of the sovereign. But Lord Dawson was about to interpret his duty in a way no one could have imagined. As the king drifted in and out of consciousness, his condition stabilized into a slow, inevitable decline. He would linger for days, perhaps longer. For the family, it was agony. For the nation, it was a period of painful uncertainty. But for Lord Dawson, it presented a problem of aesthetics and of timing. He believed the king's slow decline was undignified. A great monarch, he felt, should not fade away in a prolonged state of semi-consciousness. He deserved a firm, decisive end. But there was another, more pressing concern. A concern that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with media. In the 1930s, the news cycle was dictated by the printing presses. The morning newspapers, like the prestigious and somber Times of London, were considered the quality press, the proper vehicle for announcing a monarch's death. The evening journals, however, were seen as less reputable, more sensational. To Lord Dawson, the thought of the king's death being announced in the evening papers was, in his own words, less appropriate. The dignity of the crown, he reasoned, demanded a morning announcement. And so he made a decision he would keep secret for 50 years. He decided he would not simply wait for the king to die. He would choose the moment of his death. On the evening of January 20th, 1936, he judged the time was right. The king was comatose. Queen Mary and the Prince of Wales, the future Edward VIII, were at the bedside. Lord Dawson approached the Queen. He informed her that the king's life was moving peacefully towards its close, and that the best course of action was to accelerate the end. The Queen, exhausted and grief-stricken, simply bowed her head and shed a tear. He took this as his consent. He then prepared a lethal cocktail. First, 3/4 of a grain of morphine, then a full grain of cocaine, a combination designed not for healing, but to stop a struggling heart. He administered the fatal injection at precisely 11 o'clock at night. As he did, the king's nurse, Catherine Black, noticed the monarch stir. He muttered a final prophetic phrase. "God damn you." We will never know if those words were aimed at the doctor who was ending his life, or if they were the random ramblings of a dying man. Moments later, he fell silent. Lord Dawson then went to the telephone. He called his wife in London and told her to contact the Times. He wanted to ensure the news broke in the morning edition, as he had planned. He had curated the king's death to meet a deadline. The official announcement, which Dawson himself had drafted, was released to the waiting world. The king's life is moving peacefully towards its close. A masterful piece of prose. A gentle, reassuring lie that concealed an act of breathtaking arrogance. King George V was pronounced dead at 11:55 p.m. The news made the morning papers, just as his doctor intended. For half a century, the truth remained hidden, locked away in Lord Dawson's private diary. It was only in 1986, when his biography was published, that his own handwritten account came to light. The entry for that fateful night laid it all bare. The motivation, the dosage, the deliberate act. The revelation sent shockwaves through the country. The man who had been hailed as a loyal servant of the crown was, in fact, his king's killer. Was it murder? Or was it mercy? An act of compassion to end suffering? Or an act of hubris, a doctor playing God to control a news headline? He saw himself as preserving the king's dignity, but in doing so, he took the most profound decision of all. He chose not only how the king would die, but when. He traded the sanctity of a life for the tidiness of a legacy. A king's death is a matter of state, but in this case, the state had no idea. The final moments were not a solemn passing. They were an orchestrated event, a secret betrayal hidden behind a curtain of duty and sealed with a needle.